Hey guys, Mr. Griggs here with the second part of a two-part series on the Age of Reason. Today we're going to be focusing on the Enlightenment and how it applies to the New York State Regents exam for global history. So let's get into it and talk about some of the main ideas from the Enlightenment and also the main people and thinkers from the Enlightenment. So let's get into it. First, I'd like to start with some of the themes that you might come across on the Regents exam for a thematic essay. This is not a list of all the themes that apply to the Enlightenment, just some of the new ones we haven't explored yet. And these themes include cultural and intellectual life, citizenship, decision-making, and political systems. Now, I bolded the first and last one there because those are the ones that will more than likely be on the exam compared to the other two. So just keep that in mind. I don't think I've necessarily ever seen a citizenship or decision-making thematic essay, but hey, you never know. I'll go into how the topic here applies to the themes present, but that won't be until I do a review video on thematic essays. So just wait for that one and we'll get into it. So I only have one major essential question for you here, and that is, to what extent was the scientific revolution related to the Enlightenment? I want to understand how the scientific revolution influenced the Enlightenment, some of the similarities and differences between the two movements, and the impact that the two movements had on global history. And I think we'll see the impacts to be far-reaching. All right, so let's get into the Enlightenment here. So first and foremost, we're still using reason and logic, just like during the scientific revolution. But instead of focusing on science, we're focusing on society as a whole. So politics, we're focusing on economics, we're focusing on education, focusing on really all aspects of society and how we can understand society better and how we can improve society. So how can we make the world a better place at the end of the day? Now, these thoughts are going to undercut and undermine the authority of two major sources of authority during this time period, and that's going to be absolute monarchs, all right, and also the Roman Catholic Church. Now, these ideas not only are going to resist the authority of monarchs and the Roman Catholic Church, but it's also going to lead to some pretty incredible revolutions throughout world history. And those revolutions include the American Revolution, go USA, the French Revolution, and also the Latin American revolutions. Now, all of these revolutions have their roots in the Enlightenment, and we'll see that when we get to those. All right. Here are the major centers of enlightened thought and enlightened thinking. You'll notice Paris being a major source of intellectual vigor, if you will. You will also see the German states being a major source of Enlightenment thinking, as well as England and Scotland. So a lot of really important thinkers coming here, coming from this time period, including Adam Smith up in Scotland. He's going to be a foundational thinker in economic thought. We have some major leaders who take Enlightenment ideas and apply them to their societies, including Catherine the Great, Frederick the Great, and of course, Joseph II. So, small shout out to our buddy Ben Franklin out in Philadelphia. We'll talk about him more next year in U.S. history. So let's get into the three main ideas here from the Enlightenment. Number one is that Enlightenment philosophers believe that we could improve society by using reason, logic, and natural laws. So again, natural laws are just essentially universal rules that are always true and constant in society, in the heavens, if you will, and that's directly influenced by the thinking of the scientific revolution. So again, there's one connection that you can make. Also, the Enlightenment philosophers believe that authority doesn't come from an absolute monarch, it doesn't come from one person, it doesn't come from God or a divine source, but it comes from the people. All right. Now, you might be thinking, well, of course, Mr. Griggs, that's how we live our lives today, right? Well, we take that for granted, I think. Back in the day, in the 1700s and prior to that, authority did not come from the people. It came from above. It didn't come from below. So the fact that we have so much democracy in our world today, that we have so much republicanism, right, and representation, of the people and the people's will, the general will, if you will. See what I did there? Well, that's something that we definitely take for granted because it certainly wasn't like that back in the day. Um, and then finally, most Enlightenment philosophers wanted to move away from absolute monarchy. They saw it as inefficient, they saw it as unjust, so unfair to the people. And it just wasn't the best form of government, for the people. And again, you're going to see a lot of absolute monarchs overthrown during this time period. All right, let's get into some of the people. John Locke. The Regents exam loves John Locke. And what's not to love? I mean, he comes up with this really influential body of work during the late 1600s that will influence all subsequent thinkers, whether they agree with him or not. And his main idea is this idea that people have natural rights. Like you're born with natural rights. All right, these rights are identified as life, liberty, and property. So the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to property, and the protection of those rights. And who is supposed to protect those rights? Well, the government is supposed to protect those rights. That is their only function. All right, is that government should protect these things. If they don't, then guess what? You can get rid of that government. All right, because governments that fail to protect your natural rights, you can get rid of them, overthrow them, put in a new government that will. All right. Again, you're going to see many revolutions occur that will take this idea to heart and overthrow their governments. The American Revolution comes to mind. The French Revolution comes to mind, and so on and so forth. Two of his major primary sources that you should know at least are listed here, but I think the granddaddy of them all, all right, is going to be the two treatises on government, and that's going to be published in 1689. Just after the Glorious Revolution or so in England. He's going to have a front row seat to that revolution, and basically the two main ideas. And again, this is a very simplistic way of looking at this work. I'm not going to make you go out and actually read the whole thing, but two main takeaways are that government's role is to protect your natural rights, and if they don't, you can overthrow them. So just massively influential, as we'll see when we talk about these revolutions of the 18th and 19th centuries. Next, we have Montesquieu. He's a French thinker of the mid-18th century. And he's going to take a look at the monarchy in France, and the absolute monarchy in France. And he's going to believe that, well, too much power rests in the hands of the monarch, which it did. And he thought that, hey, if we split up the power, if we divide the power into three separate branches, an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch, then society will prosper, and governments will be efficient, and governments will work better for the people. This is a system of separation of powers. This is a system of checks and balances. If one branch gets too powerful, then the other branches can check that power and bring balance to the government, if you will, to the force, if you will, right? This is all found in his famous work, Spirit of the Laws. Now, how does this apply to, say, the United States? Well, take a look at our government, all right? We have a separation of power in our government, all right? And the legislative branch is going to be there to help create laws. An executive branch will be there to enforce laws, and the judicial branch will be there to interpret laws. All right. And each branch has a different types of powers, right, that they can use to ensure that another branch doesn't become too powerful. So, the president can't become too powerful and do whatever he wants, right? lawmakers can't become too powerful and do whatever they want. They can check and balance each other. And that's Montesquieu, really. He popularizes that idea in France. Voltaire is a just amazingly influential writer during the 1700s in France. He's the equivalent of what like a rock star would be today. Everybody knew who he was. He was infamous. He was somebody who wrote books that supported freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and I think one of his his biggest influence rather would be his ideas about the separation of church and state, right? And this is going to really upset the Roman Catholic Church in France during this time period. He's going to be like enemy number one for them. But regardless, he's going to have an audience all across the world, really, and some very important people too. Monarchs, really. Catherine the Great is a pen pal of Voltaire. They write each other back and forth. Frederick the Great is buddies with Voltaire, if you will, during this time period. So he's well known, and he is somebody who uses humor in his works. A lot of his work can be seen as satire today. So we see satire today as being like like Saturday Night Live and stuff. So using humor to kind of poke at societal problems and point them out to people. And that's what Voltaire did. And he was very, very good at doing it. One of his most famous works is Candide, which is a satire of French society during the 1700s. I definitely suggest checking it out. It reads like a novel. It's very, very good. And something I think any history fan should read. Next, we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who is a Swiss Enlightenment thinker. He's from Geneva, Switzerland. Spends a lot of time in France. It's where a lot of the action was happening. But he is famous for this idea of society having this social contract, this agreement that all people can work together for the common good of that society, that the laws should be made not by an absolute monarch, but by the people in a society, and it should apply equally to the people in a society. Now, Rousseau's thoughts are complex, and I'm not going to go too deeply into them. Because the video would be over an hour at least at that point. But just understand that these ideas of equality and that the source of power coming from the people are complete enlightened thoughts, right? These are thoughts that are coming from the Enlightenment, and these are thoughts that we have today, right? And even in the French Revolution, we see Rousseau's ideas used and actually, cited to form, really important documents like the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. It's just a really, really big deal and something we need to recognize moving into the Regents exam. Now, what are the effects? Again, we talked about this throughout the review video here. Revolution. These are going to be ideas written down and read by many, many people. And a lot of these people didn't just put the book down and go on with their everyday lives and just let things happen as they were happening. But there was a call to action here. And, these ideas are going to influence real radical change. Right? The French Revolution is one of the most radical revolutions in world history. I talked about the French Revolution being in the top 3 of most important human events, at least definitely in the modern era and quite possibly ever. So something to think about. And also you're going to see the development of these enlightened despots, these enlightened monarchs, who are going to take the ideas of the Enlightenment and apply them to their societies, whether it be through reforms in education, military reforms, political reforms, maybe some freedom of speech, perhaps freedom of the press. Maybe newspapers can publish things now without, being punished, things like that. That's a big deal because, in our country, in particular with our Bill of Rights, we love the fact that we have freedom of speech. We love the fact that we have our First Amendment. So not a lot of countries had that back in the day. So definitely an influence from the Enlightenment.